We will remember 2023 as a triumphant year for Japanese film. Boy and the Heron was the highest-grossing American release in Studio Ghibli's history, and dominated the animated award circuit. Godzilla Minus 1's American gross actually exceeded its domestic gross, a first for a Japanese-produced Godzilla film. Its nomination for Best Visual Effects is the first Academy Award nomination for any Godzilla feature, an honor 70 years in the making. But there's a film many have forgotten this award season. This film was also the largest US debut in the history of its studio. Wildly successful in Japan, it's a tremendous and dramatic step for its director, and in my opinion, his most important work so far. And despite its quality, sincerity, and achievement, it's fading quickly from our memories. While nominated for the Golden Globes and the Annie Awards, it received no statuettes to its name. The Academy didn't even acknowledge it with a nomination. I want to discuss the metaphor of Makoto Shinkai's Suzume, and present some reasons why, in my estimation, it is truly a film worth remembering. Unlike Boy and the Heron, the first Ghibli film in 10 years and possibly the last film Miyazaki will ever make, Suzume had a standard production of around 3 years, and fans of its creator, Makoto Shinkai, were somewhat restrained in their anticipation. Shinkai's career is an eclectic one. He quit his job as an artist at game company Nihon Falcom to create the 5-minute short She and Her Cat in 1999, then created the ambitious 20-minute short film Voices of a Distant Star in 2002, more or less on his own. Influenced both creatively and pragmatically by the minimalist emptiness of Evangelion, his early films emphasize stillness, loneliness, and melancholy beauty. But the everyday world was always front and center. A woman's apartment, a small town in winter, and the all-too-real feelings of loss and mundanity. He cited Miyazaki as a great mentor and was compared to him around this time, but I argue that the use of Miyazaki's name was simply an easy shorthand for sublime beauty in animation. In truth, Shinkai's work stood on its own. But unlike Miyazaki, he was not attaining mass appeal. His films pleased people, but were not people-pleasers, and even his fans were quick to note his niche appeal. Furthermore, his films tended not to adhere to a 90-minute runtime. This was probably cheaper in some cases, but resulted in films that weren't theater-ready. He changed this starting with his self-professed feature debut, The Children Who Chase Lost Voices, which was almost 2 hours in length. But Children was a box office flop, grossing under $1 million on what was likely a larger budget. With the positive but muted reception to his 2013 work, Garden of Words, a 45-minute, lengthy short, it seemed like Shinkai was destined to keep making passionate little films about quiet, sad moments, existing in parallel to giants like Miyazaki, with the two never destined to meet. Until one day, their prospects seemed to switch. In the midst of Miyazaki's temporary retirement, Shinkai hit his stride with the exceptional 2016 opus Your Name. A gorgeous, upbeat, supernatural romance which for the first time in Shinkai's pantheon features a happy if melodramatic ending. Its critical and commercial reception was pristine. It made more money abroad than Spirited Away. It is still the 3rd highest grossing film in Japanese history. Your Name was Shinkai's long-deserved triumph, and it would become his burden. The question of how to follow Your Name must have weighed heavily on Shinkai. It certainly weighed on everyone else. Inevitably, his follow-up film, 2019's Weathering with You, would not be defined entirely by its own merits, but in comparison to Your Name. Anticipation was high for the rainy day romance to find its place in the Shinkai pantheon. Unlike the dampened world the movie depicted, the prevailing opinion on Weathering with You was cut and dry. It was not as good as Your Name. It didn't matter if the movie was good at all, most people thought it was, but though it was not a box office bomb, even Shinkai felt obliged to speak what was on everyone's mind. It didn't do as well as Your Name. Now, Shinkai wasn't giving up or retiring. By Japanese standards, the now 50-year-old director is on the younger side, but it seemed that he had lost the magic touch. I'm sure many who discovered him through Your Name and were let down by Weathering felt comfortable forgetting him in the ever-churning torrent of anime movies and the tumultuous events of 2020, which dampened the film's international release. But I wasn't giving up on Shinkai that easily. I first encountered Shinkai's short film Voices of a Distant Star in an American comic shop that stocked a shelf of rentable anime DVDs around the year 2002. When Your Name thrust him into the limelight, I felt overjoyed at his long overdue success. He was not a one-hit wonder to me, but that's how the world was seeing him. And how could he possibly outdo Your Name? How could he remain worthy of remembrance? These were the questions on my mind when I first saw Suzume in the spring of 2023. I convinced a group of friends to accompany me, having introduced them to Your Name in the weeks prior, and we settled in having read no reviews, seen no preview trailers, and knowing basically nothing about the plot, except that it seemed to involve doors. Overall, we enjoyed the film. The resplendent environments and solid character animation were highlights for us all, but discussion centered on a familiar sentiment. The other film was a little better. It was Weathering with You all over again, and reviewers seemed to agree. But something was amiss. As I asked my friends about their experience, it became clear that a misunderstanding had occurred. This misunderstanding deprived the film of its meaning, lessened their experience of it, and the worst part was, they didn't seem to know it was happening. And it was not a misunderstanding of the metaphor. It was a misunderstanding of the narrative. While it is very important to our practice, metaphorical analysis is not the only way to analyze a film. In her book, Rhetorical Criticism, Sonja Foss details 9 methods of analysis, including metaphorical and narrative. No one method is superior to the others, and all can be employed to better understand a piece of culture. We've discussed metaphorical analysis in some detail when analyzing The Boy and the Heron, but we haven't needed to discuss narrative analysis until now. Narrative analysis appears straightforward. It generally consists of identifying the characters, actions, and settings in a story and clarifying what they are. In a way, all audiences undergo some narrative analysis when they watch films, but it isn't always an easy process. Christopher Nolan's film Memento, for example, purposefully shuffles the events of its narrative to evoke the mindset of its protagonist, whose memory only allows him to retain 5 minutes of awareness of his surroundings. This makes the film hard to piece together at first. A good narrative analysis might rearrange those events chronologically and organize the characters and their actions so viewers understand what happened and can better engage with the film. The disambiguation of complex plots in this manner can be very satisfying. YouTube videos in particular seem to revel in applying this analysis to the endings of films, opining on what really happened. But we know from our study of Bart that stories cannot confine themselves to one single interpretation. How does narrative analysis reconcile itself with the need for open-endedness in storytelling? Foss provides an answer in her analysis of metaphor itself. She says the purpose of metaphorical analysis is to identify the major metaphors used and to analyze how they create a particular reality. She divides this process into 5 steps: to examine the work, to isolate its metaphors, to sort the metaphors isolated, to analyze the conclusions the metaphor leads us to, and finally, to assess those conclusions. The last 2 steps are the core of our metaphorical analysis, discussing what to make of it all, and how it might deepen our experience, which we've discussed in great detail before. But notice that the first 3 steps of this process involve finding the metaphors in situ, figuring out where they are in the work, and organizing them. This is where narrative analysis comes in. To understand the metaphor, we must understand the work underpinning it, and in the case of film, that examination is the narrative analysis. For us then, narrative analysis is the clear assessment of characters, actions, and settings. While it can serve to reduce confusion and provide a common starting point with regard to the events of a story, it does not have to resolve every ambiguity to serve its purpose. Narrative analysis forms a basis for other analyses, and while we can undertake it separately for the purposes of discussion, we don't usually employ it for its own sake. We shouldn't forget that our ultimate purpose is to deepen our resonance with the works we engage with, and narrative analysis should help us along that path. Let's keep this in mind as we engage with the narrative of Suzume, because an inability to do so will hinder our ability to understand its metaphor. Many narrative analyses focus on the role of main characters first. In his iconic screenwriting manifesto, Save the Cat, writer Blake Snyder repeatedly espouses the importance of characters to a saleable script, and by extension to a narrative which is compelling. In explaining why this is, Blake explains that character is the primary window for an audience to enter into a story. Narrative analysis, therefore, suggests that to engage with the metaphor of Suzume, we should begin by identifying the characters who will experience that metaphor. The eponymous Suzume Iwato leads the story, and besides the fact that she lives not with her mother but with her aunt, Tamaki, there's not a lot to say about her. She seems optimistic and good-humored, her body type and hair are pretty standard for anime, and we don't see her outside a school uniform for the first 15 minutes of the film. We certainly don't have any sense of her goals. In short, Suzume is somewhat defined by her mundanity. Her aunt seems much the same, if anything. The mysterious boy Sota, who Suzume encounters on her commute to school, says barely a word. In a telling moment when Suzume calls out to Sota before she knows his name, she uses the word Ikemen-san. The English translation renders this as Mr., but it's a lot closer to hot or attractive guy. Like us, the audience, all she has to go on about this man are his stylish looks. When he's unceremoniously turned into a chair, however, we see something of a reversal. He's no longer conventionally attractive, but he will start to take on a very literal and metaphorical supporting role as the two unite against Daijin. Daijin seems to be the most defined as a character. The word Daijin is rendered in katakana, which means that its meaning is ambiguous, but several homophones exist in the form of the words for rich man or big spender. This is why many characters in the film make puns when Daijin is flaunting about. However, it could also be taken to mean a great god or a cabinet minister. It's a name of some importance, and the juxtaposition with his cute voice and appearance create a kind of personality. Indeed, he's framed as a villain for the first part of the film, and the main goal Suzume and Sota first acquire is to capture and stop Daijin. It's no coincidence that once Suzume and Sota gain this clear goal, the pace of the film picks up considerably. In the Western tradition of screenwriting, it's said that a character's goals should always be tangible and evident. Both Blake and contemporaneous screenwriting consultant Linda Seeger talk at length about the importance of goals to the appeal of a plot. The pair's pursuit of Daijin becomes the core of the film's conflict, taking them across Japan, and I do mean all across Japan. In an unprecedented move for Shinkai, whose films mostly stick to the Tokyo area or a semi-fictional rural town, Suzume is set in very specific non-Tokyo locations. When we see her take the ferry, it becomes clear she lives in Kyushu, the southwestern island of Japan. To those who don't live there, Japan can seem like a small country, but the distance from Kyushu's largest city, Fukuoka, to Tokyo is about 1,200 kilometers, 700 miles. That's the distance from Seattle to San Francisco, or Berlin to Rome. Shinkai acknowledged this intention, saying he wanted to capture a sense of road trip-like adventure in Suzume. And this begs a question to the viewers. We know that we're on the road and that Daijin is going to keep moving, so where literally is this story going? If the story is moving towards Tokyo, which is mentioned early on as Sota's home base, it will be quite the trip in physical terms. And it would also place us squarely in Shinkai's backyard, both literally as his studio is based in Tokyo's Chiyoda ward, and thematically as most of his films take place and have their climaxes in Tokyo. This begs another question and a related line of inquiry. That of the dramatic journey. Another rule of screenwriting is that a plot's tension increases over time. That is to say, events and confrontations should become more intense in terms of emotion and stakes as the film approaches its climax. We see this play out in Suzume's various encounters with the doors. The first door is in an abandoned resort, and closes with just the effort of Suzume and Sota. The second is in a school, and this time Sota, being a chair, needs a bit more help. By the time they reach the abandoned amusement park, a chase and life-threatening obstacles have ensued. The danger to Suzume and Sota increases over time, but we also notice another trend, an increase of emotional investment. In the first door closing, we barely see any memories of the resort and hardly get any sense of what happened to it, but the school is connected to the character Chika, who takes Suzume in. The school was Chika's old school, and we see the memories of the children who had to attend it. When the amusement park's power returns, we see the people in the town light up emotionally. Their investment in the park and the joy that it brought before it was abandoned is evident and widespread. This leads us to the other half of the question Shinkai is beginning to ask. Where, emotionally, is this story going? The answer seems obvious. When Suzume and Sota arrive in Tokyo, and Sota begins losing his connection to the physical world, it seems like we've reached a logical conclusion. With the 14 million citizens of Tokyo hanging in the balance, closing the door on an earthquake here seems like the appropriate place for the story to end. With Sota's transformation and abandonment of his physical presence, the quake is averted. But of course, Suzume, and we as the audience, can't bear it to end here. And that's when we realize that Tokyo wasn't the ending after all. We're going somewhere else. And on top of that, Daijin is no longer an oppositional force. All of the conflict of the film seems to have dissipated, but we're still driven onward. But to where? I was pondering this question during the car scene, as the group drives down the highway to the sultry sounds of Rouge no Dengon, the Japanese intro to Kiki's delivery service. Between this and an earlier reference made to Whisper of the Heart, Shinkai's never made so many Ghibli references in his films before. He seems to have taken his Miyazaki-like criticisms in stride. Perhaps the references offer an offbeat humor, or even establish this world as being one close to our own, at least insofar as having Ghibli films, but it's not just a one-off gag. The song itself is appropriate for a variety of reasons, and not just because, as the characters note, they have a cat in tow. On a literal level, it's a song about a journey. The singer is riding a train, passing cars on her way to the house of her boyfriend's mother. She's discovered her boyfriend is fooling around with someone behind her back, and written him a message in rouge in his bathroom, explaining that if he doesn't stop, she won't be back. While it sounds dramatic, the song is delivered with such a peppy, doo-wop spirit as to make the whole thing have a lighter, almost comedic tone. But it also shows the singer is not letting the affair get her down, and perhaps it implies her sing-song tone conceals her inner pain. The journey she's on to confront her problem at their roots, passing cars at twilight, focuses our attention on our character's journey, just as the GPS comes up on the movie screen. Rendered in Shinkai's trademark pristine detail, we can clearly see the contour of the coast, and we know we were heading northeast for around 8 hours. Inevitably, I imagine, most viewers must ask, what even lies northeast of Tokyo? And that's the moment when it clicked. When I knew where we were going. The metaphor and the narrative were coming to bear, and the realization was so powerful I couldn't stop thinking about it. Finally, we arrive at the scene. The scene that brings the entire film together. An astounding amount of my friends and family watched it the whole way through and didn't really understand it, but it's the key to the whole film. It's not something they didn't know. Just like Suzume, it's something they've forgotten. She comes to the abandoned house. She digs out the diary that we've only seen in flashbacks. She flips through the pages to find the memories that she needs to save Sota from cold oblivion, flips until she finds the numbers that changed her life forever. 311. On March 11th, 2011, a 9.0 earthquake, the strongest in recorded Japanese history and the 4th strongest earthquake ever recorded, struck the east coast of Japan. It caused a tsunami wave 40 meters high, 133 feet. The impact damaged the Fukushima nuclear reactor, and despite the brave efforts of its staff, the Unit 1 reactor would suffer a full meltdown. While the event has come to be known as the Tohoku earthquake, after the northeast region in which it occurred, these 3 terrible occurrences, the quake, the tsunami, and the meltdown, gave the event the far more harrowing title, the Triple Disaster. Almost 20,000 people drowned, hundreds of thousands would be relocated, and over 200 children would be orphaned. The government advocated for national unity in the face of the disaster, a sentiment which coalesced in the concept of kizuna. Kizuna, roughly translated as bonds or connections, was voted Word of the Year at the time. It was historically thought of as a term for one's personal and local relationships, But after 3/11, the sentiment behind the word began to change, taking on a more general attitude of caring for others and being group-oriented. Foreign news coverage at this time focused on the lack of looting by survivors and the orderly way in which disaster victims composed themselves, something that the world at large looked on with admiration. It certainly aligns with widespread views on Japan as an orderly and supportive society, presumably another reason why the government advocated for it. But this sentiment was at best an ideal. In her book, Reimagining Japan After Fukushima, Tamaki Mihik points out Kizuna as it was once understood, as the connection between individuals was breaking down. Younger generations, which would have usually stayed closer to their grandparents, elected to leave Tohoku to get away from the perceived danger of radiation. But when they resettled elsewhere, they were greeted with distrust, and found that their circumstances meant that they were hardly able to be treated equally to those who hadn't endured the disaster. The most fundamental idea of Kizuna, the idea that people should be connected and stick together, was failing the survivors. Domestic discourse often focused more on Tokyo than Tohoku, elaborating upon the what-ifs of if such an event were to happen to Tokyo, as though Tokyo's citizens mattered more inherently, in the media space at least. This trend came to a head years after the event, when in 2017, at a political gathering, the Minister of Reconstruction, one Imamura Mashiro, said of the quake, "It was good that the disaster occurred over there in Tohoku. If it had been close to the capital zone, there would have been enormous damage." As though the damage in Tohoku was both fine and not enormous, since it only displaced hundreds of thousands of people somewhere no one really cared about. He resigned soon after, but his gaffe had the feel of a Freudian slip. His mistake was not to think something that no one else would dare think. Kizuna, if it did exist, did not seem to spread outside of Tohoku. The truth is that the Tohoku region has long been separated culturally from central Japan. Its cultural roots date back to the Ainu indigenous people, who inhabited northern Japan before the rise of the Yamato central government in what is now Kyoto. The Tohoku terrain lent itself to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, focused particularly on fishing, unlike that of the rice-centric central Japanese plains. But after being defeated in the Sengoku Jidai, the medieval civil wars, the central government forced Tohoku to begin rice farming. This made Tohoku economically dependent on the profits from selling their rice, and more susceptible to famine because they had to sell the only thing they were allowed to eat. Even into the modern day, commentators have pointed out how Tohoku was still providing for the central government through its nuclear power, and how through the disaster, it had once again paid a price that the government had not. 3/11, in short, had not just upended the lives of the people of Tohoku. It had upended Japanese society, revealed unaddressed prejudices centuries in the making, and shown that Japan's ideal of Kizuna was at best forgotten, had possibly been corrupted, and at worst may never have been there to begin with. Kizuna had failed to influence the actions of Japan. But Kizuna is just a symbol, and to influence people it had to engage in rhetoric, as explained by Foss. Perhaps the failure did not lie in the symbol, but the rhetoric, and if the government could not supply compelling rhetoric, maybe the entertainment industry could. It was in this context that Makoto Shinkai took the stage. He took it upon himself to create a work which would address the questions of 3/11. It was this moment which inspired him to create Your Name. While it's commonly read as a metaphor for long-distance relationships, Your Name also has very strong overtones as a metaphor for 3/11. Indeed, Shinkai explicitly stated that he was inspired by the earthquake while he was making it. And the influence of the triple disaster is hard to unsee. Take the fact that, like the tsunami, the meteor's visitation to Earth occurs on a long-term cycle, something Shinkai acknowledges as part of the tsunami discourse. Take the fact that the tsunami's waves reached Tohoku about half an hour after the initial quake, and the meteor lands in the fictional town of Itomori half an hour after it splits in the atmosphere. And of course, the conspicuous similarity of the film's term musubi, the idea of being linked to other people, and the idea of Kizuna. If nothing else, Your Name's influence as one of the most popular Japanese films ever makes it worth discussing from this angle, as surely, releasing just 5 years after the disaster, everyone in the audience was at some level wondering what Shinkai was wondering. When we have a disaster in Japan, I wonder, how can we prevent our lives and traditions and history from the disaster? Your Name's answer to this question, like the concept of Kizuna, is at best idealistic, and at worst, it's deeply problematic. It doesn't take a genius to remark that envisioning a fantasy world in which supernatural actions prevent traumatic acts from happening is not the most healthy way to deal with trauma. None of us will ever be able to save the 20,000 dead, or warn the 500,000 refugees. The film's solution doesn't give us any way to better engage with such an event in the future. It provides no actionable answer to Shinkai's question, particularly for the survivors of 311. Or at least, it doesn't seem to. If we think of the film's core question as, how do we persist after disaster, it does provide an answer. In the film, after rescuing Mitsuha, we see that she moves to Tokyo and adopts the city life she'd always wanted. It's implied that she eventually gets together with Taki and lives a happy romantic city life. When viewed through the lens of the romantic metaphor, this can be seen as encouraging you to follow your heart. In narrative terms, it feels very satisfying because her goal to live in the city is made clear at the start of the film. I think this is why many people overlook the 311 lens in favor of the romantic metaphor, which feels both happier and more complete. But for survivors of 311, the message is different. Clear and dour. Assimilate. Happiness lies in leaving your land behind and joining ours. If we all had a Taki waiting for us, if we all had jobs and acceptance, this could at least be seen as a somewhat happy outlook. But we've seen that in reality, acceptance was not forthcoming. Even the survivors that wanted to leave did not find welcoming communities in the cities they left for. And the perspective of those who wanted to stay is not reflected in the film at all. It's notable that Mitsuha's fictional town would be much closer geographically to the cities of Gifu or Nagoya, but Mitsuha wants to go to Tokyo, both because of her emotional bond to Taki and because of a metaphorical sense that Tokyo is Japan. She doesn't go to a city that has a connection to the place she grew up, a place that was literally razed to the ground, a place that needs to be remembered. She leaves it behind because nothing compares to the importance of Tokyo, both for Mitsuha and the metaphor. I am particularly disheartened by Shinkai's own explanation for Mitsuha's motivations. He admits that Mitsuha embodies his own upbringing and that he didn't consult anyone from the actual countryside, to say nothing of the actual survivors of Fukushima. Now, as a creator, I am sympathetic to this viewpoint. We all have to start writing from our own lived experience, and it's clearly an experience that resonated with a great portion of his audience. But you don't have to have malicious intentions to affect unfortunate results. And Shinkai's lack of engagement with the plight of survivors is evident in the worldview that his film promotes. Now, I want to be clear. I loved the film Your Name when I first saw it. But a variety of critics do see it as a metaphor for the Tohoku earthquake, and as a Tohoku metaphor, it's a problematic film. While Your Name succeeded at the box office and succeeded as a romance, it was truly lacking as an answer to Shinkai's question. If anything, it promoted the forgetting of culture and tradition. In trying to stop the meteor, it had aided in its destructive power. But it's clear that Shinkai had more to say. By returning to the subject in a far more overt way, Shinkai has turned the metaphorical subtext into the main text, forced us and himself to deal with the question once again. So what, if anything, have the years taught him? What would be the metaphor that underpinned Suzume? The Fukushima angle is integral to understanding Suzume. And while many film critics seem to have grasped the allusion to Fukushima, about 70 to 80% of the people that I knew who saw the film didn't make the connection. Shinkai himself noted that in foreign screenings he attended, where he asked the audience if they remembered Fukushima, about 30% said they did, which aligns well with my experience. Even within Japan, he notes, the teenagers are starting to forget about the Tohoku disaster. So what does the Tohoku metaphor do for Suzume? The most immediate way it affects the film is regarding Suzume herself, completely recontextualizing her character into something I'm not sure I've seen before. Recall how Suzume's character appears unremarkable at first glance. Many critics have assigned a value judgment to the fact that Suzume appears to lack clear goals and characteristics. She's just a random girl who's somewhat nice. These critics find nothing compelling about the unremarkable Suzume, the girl, and therefore disengage with Suzume, the film. Again, this aligns with the way that Blake emphasizes the importance of clear, tangible character goals in the Western tradition of screenwriting. This is one of the reasons that Mitsuha, while she's problematic for Your Name's Metaphor, succeeds as a clear protagonist because she always wanted to go to the city. But knowing about Fukushima, we realize something important. Suzume is not normal. The first thing we learn is that she's racked with dreams about the trauma that ended her childhood. She's been forced to move as far as physically possible from the place where she grew up. We learn at the end of the film that she wants to be a nurse, like her mother, to try and reclaim a good future from her tragic past. True, we see none of this when we first meet Suzume. From a first-time filmmaker, this would seem like an oversight, but Shinkai has created more appealing versions of this character archetype before. This presentation of Suzume seems deliberate. It's not a mistake of the storytelling, and therefore, a realization arises. We don't see Suzume's inner self, because she doesn't want to show it to us. Suzume is a survivor who keeps her identity hidden. She dresses normal. She acts normal. She wants to assimilate. She keeps her dreams to herself, literally and metaphorically. In the lens of the metaphor, we see Suzume as not just a survivor, but the survivor. Thousands of people who had to leave their homes behind surely followed in Suzume's footsteps, surely encountered suspicion and rumor about their sordid origins and began to hide where they had come from. They want to forget. They want everyone to forget. And yet deep inside, they cannot. This beautiful truth would be missed by those who write off Suzume as a boring protagonist. This is the danger of assigning a value judgment to a characterization and letting narrative be the end of your analysis. We, the audience, are being asked if we can push past the barrier of normalcy and get to know Suzume for who she is and where she's been, just like Sota does. Sota doesn't know that Suzume is a survivor until close to the end of the story. He's adamant that she shouldn't get involved in his closer activities at the start. He's emotionally distant, and he comes from a distant land, Tokyo. Sota is Tokyo, the center of Japan, its government and its orthodoxy. It's their responsibility to respond to and quell disaster. It's a somber and necessary thing. They've been responsible for it for generations, but they don't always undertake it with an eye for compassion. Even when they seek to do right, they can lose sight of what they're doing it for. Sota knows his history. His technical know-how is superb. His apartment is filled with books. What it lacks is a sense of humanity. He's literally training to be a teacher, to help raise up the next generation, but he hasn't connected with the people he's trying to raise up or save. This also gives dimension to the coldness which is taking over his soul. When he's turned into a chair, we are seeing another metaphor being made manifest, that of the support which is not human. Being a chair is to support others. Chairs are useful, and Sota is constantly, hilariously useful. But even though he can talk, and others can hear him, he tries not to. He hides that emotion, all emotion, and over time, that emotional coldness threatens to overtake his reality, to turn him into nothing more than an object. A government can set out to do the right things, but if they lack the warmth of humanity, their goodwill freezes over. The distance of the government, literally and metaphorically, failed so many survivors of Fukushima. The government became, at best, a support, and a support which wasn't always stable. Sota's lack of emotion throughout most of the film will eventually sap him of humanity. The only way out is to embrace his desire to live, to love, to be human, something Suzume wants for him as well. She wants to preserve Sota's humanity, And there's another character who's fighting her emotions and hiding her humanity. That character is Tamaki. She, of course, knows from the beginning that Suzume is a survivor, and we discover she's adopted Suzume when her mother died, and she's incredibly concerned when she hears Suzume left on an impromptu journey across Japan. At first, we may perceive this as an overprotective parental behavior, but through the lens of Suzume's true identity, the situation gains nuance. Tamaki has almost lost Suzume before. In her eyes, Suzume is still a child, her sister's child that she's devoted her life to caring for. In some ways, it simplifies her life to define it through this role. It simplifies it so much, it's not even true to herself. She feels as though she's sacrificed everything for Suzume, suffered because of Suzume, but in truth, she suffered because of 311. Shinkai explicitly discussed this, saying, Tohoku didn't just affect the immediate survivors. It affected the lives of millions more across the country as people were relocated. So it begs the question, is Tamaki a first-hand victim of the incident or not? Or is she something in between? In the course of making this film and writing Tamaki, I thought a lot about where I fit on this spectrum of how the earthquake and tsunami affected my life and my personal relationship to the disaster. Tamaki is one of the in-betweens, someone who may not have lost their life, their house, or their livelihood, but whose life was still forever changed. As Shinkai points out, this definition can be widely inclusive and therefore acknowledges the effects of 311 on people from all across Japan. If there are tens or hundreds of thousands of survivors of Fukushima, there are millions of Tamakis. Acknowledging and remembering all her sacrifices allows her to truly and wholeheartedly appreciate the good she was able to do for Suzume. This outpouring of emotion and surfacing of the subconscious is what Sadaijin represents. He has a relation with Sota's grandfather and introduces himself as though he's literally possessed Tamaki as she expresses her pent-up frustration. His appearance alone makes clear that he is conceived as a counterpart to Daijin, his opposite half. What then of his counterpart? What about Daijin? Daijin is the source of conflict for the first two acts of the film. He emerges from the first door and turns Sota into a chair. Daijin leads Sota and Suzume to every open door and then tells them how to stop the emergence of the worm in Tokyo. When he does this, he reveals that Sota has become the keystone and that there's actually nothing Daijin can do to directly stop the worm's emergence in Tokyo. We know that Sota represents the stabilizing force of centralized Japan and its government. In this moment, Daijin says the government with its just but cold support is the force which will quell disaster. But as we see from the film, it comes at a price Suzume is unwilling to pay, and Sota, while willing, discovers he doesn't want to. He wishes to escape. And when he does this, Daijin regains his form as the keystone and again stops the worm. Daijin is clearly, in the end, a force for good. But if he's on the side of good, why doesn't he just say so? Why does he act in ways that seem so mischievous and cause so much pain? Why is Sadaijin introduced explicitly to highlight the need for candid expression? Why are the cats portrayed like antagonists? To understand the answer is to understand the Japanese psyche. Many years ago, the famous Japanese author Haruki Murakami undertook his own Shinkai-like project to dissect, understand, and engage with a traumatic event that had rocked Japanese society. It may sound surprisingly familiar. 1995 will be remembered as a dreadful year for Japanese society. On January 19th, a 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck Japan, 20 kilometers from the city of Kobe. The government was famously so unable to assist in the early days that a Yakuza syndicate, the Yamaguchi Group, mobilized to help locals in need. But fascinatingly, this is not the event Murakami set out to cover. On the morning of March 20th, members of a doomsday cult released sarin gas on various trains in the Tokyo subway. Officially, over 1,000 people would be injured, and miraculously, only 12 would lose their lives. But as we've seen, the effects of these events on bystanders and families can all too easily be swept aside when compiled into discrete numbers. Malaise, PTSD, and ongoing complications were common. Now, you might think that the travails of Murakami have little to do with those of Shinkai and the Tohoku earthquake. But the fascinating thing is that the experiences of the survivors of both events have commonalities that even Murakami was able to point out more than 10 years before the Tohoku earthquake. The violence of both events had similar psychological effects on people. More fascinatingly, victims of both events found themselves at a loss for where to cast blame, even when one event was literally man-made. Murakami summarized the comparison beautifully, saying, "Both were nightmarish eruptions beneath our feet, from underground, that threw all the latent contradictions and weak points of our society into frighteningly high relief." Murakami was of course referring to the Kobe earthquake at the time, but the sentiment remains strikingly relevant to the Tohoku earthquake which would befall Japan years later. In his book, Underground, Murakami set out to conduct interviews with survivors and the affected. And as he did so, he came head-to-head with a Daijin-like antagonist in the society itself. The victims, for the most part, were not interested or were discouraged by their families from relating their experiences. This reluctance to talk was not isolated to the victims, but extended to how the government itself covered the event. The practice of remembering these events, especially the personal failings associated with them, is discouraged on an institutional level, and it seeps down through all of society. In Mihik's analysis of Kizuna, she also touches upon the topic of gaman, a Japanese phrase resembling the English phrase to tough it out or to grin and bear it. In the context of Tohoku, this phrase, very common and somewhat innocuous in Japanese, took on a more sinister meaning, as though to push the survivors to endure onward and onward for some ephemeral greater good. It's little surprise that The Economist later observed that survivors were beginning to actively resent the idea of gaman. But this concept, that one should endure suffering quietly rather than communicate about it, is still embedded in society. And those like Murakami who actively fight against it are rare, and their task is difficult. But that's not to say it's not worthwhile. The interviews Murakami collected are both harrowing and moving. It's clear that a great many people, like Tamaki, found both despair and triumph in their tragic experience of the sarin attack. People who grasped onto purpose, people who grasped onto hope, people who embraced activism, and a great many who realized the importance of remembering it all, despite the pain of the events and the societal pressure to bury them. Japanese society has undergone many painful disasters. To heal them requires upheaval and candor, something Japanese society often avoids. But in the end, only this acknowledgement of pain can allow society to set that pain to rest. Daijin and Sadaijin cause havoc. They upend emotions. They demand we reconcile with painful memories. They appear to be our enemies, but in the end, they are our friends. Ultimately, they love people. Together, they are our keystone, the thing that holds us together. They are the process of healing itself. In the years since creating Your Name, it's clear that Shinkai and Japan as a whole have done a lot of soul-searching. The growth of Shinkai between his films is the growth of Japan at large. Moving on from disaster, the Japanese have discovered, is not as simple as wishing it didn't happen, hoping that our best values would always win out against it, or pretending that if we forgot about the problem that we wouldn't have to deal with it. And Shinkai delivers that message in a way no other Japanese could. Underground is an important book, but it's a tough read, and the only data I could find suggested that it sold about 270,000 copies in its native Japan. That's not even 2% of the population of Tokyo alone. No matter how moving the book is, its reach is limited by the fact that it's a dour read, the fact that it's non-fiction, and the reality that it's a novel in the 21st century. Suzume is an important movie, but Shinkai has learned about the craft of mass media through film. He's seen that people resonate with upbeat characters and dramatic storylines. He explicitly talks about realizing that Suzume could have become a much darker film by focusing on the Tohoku quake from the start. He purposefully incorporated the zaniness and humor of the three-legged chair to offset this. but he's also long wielded the power to tug at the heartstrings. With this film, he's understood that these two sides of his artistic process can intertwine. He's done his own soul-searching and realized that, through animated film, he could bring the lessons he'd learned to an audience that needed them, while maintaining a broad appeal that more direct, unembellished media could not. Suzume grossed $10 million in the US alone, which is almost twice as much as Your Name did. If every viewer paid $20 a ticket, the film would have still been seen 500,000 times just in America, one of its smaller markets. It grossed $110 million in Japan, $112 in China, and over $300 million worldwide, making it, as of this writing, the fourth highest grossing Japanese film ever. Murakami is critically acclaimed and well known. But Shinkai, at least in Japan, has a reach that Murakami doesn't, and he used it to give us Suzume. For many, that's where the story of Suzume ends, with a nuanced, poignant, and empowering metaphor for the 2011 Tohoku disaster and the process of living thereafter. But if you're keen, and especially if you're not Japanese, there's a question I think needs to be asked. Should we care about Suzume at all? The triple disaster didn't befall our countries. Perhaps this film is simply not meant for us, and we're never going to have the connection to it that the Japanese do. Shinkai himself claims he doesn't consider the foreign audience when he makes film. Should we even try to engage with a film that's not meant for us? If you're willing to give me a chance, I'd like to argue that we should. And in fact, that this is where the most important and beautiful part of Suzume's metaphor lies. If you read through discussions with Shinkai about his inspirations for Suzume, the Tohoku aspect dominates a lot of interviews, but it isn't his only inspiration. Shinkai also repeatedly takes time to talk about the Jichinsai. As he describes it, Jichinsai is a Japanese ceremony held to commemorate something's construction. As Shinkai's father runs a construction company, we imagine Shinkai was quite familiar with the ritual. But what he notes is the lack of a corresponding ritual for the end of a place. And every time Suzume closes a door, Sota says a prayer. I render a translation as, O wise and unseen gods hidden among us, O guardian deities of our distant ancestors, these mountains and rivers you long ago bestowed upon us, most humbly and most sincerely, we return them unto you. When we first hear this incantation, it carries the feel of a typical anime's magic jargon. We have no emotional connection to it. But later in the film, Sota emphasizes that the incantation must be recited with the memories which should be there in mind. From that point on, we're conscious of memories being rekindled, but if we go back to the first door's closing, we can see memories there. We see just a few seconds as the first door closes. The memories of families who attended the resort in its heyday. The film never goes into detail as to why the resort has closed down. Since the town Suzume lives in is never named and is likely a pastiche of towns in South Kyushu, we can't pinpoint a real-world resort as an inspiration. It's true that the real 2016 Kumamoto earthquake would have occurred in this area. At the time of Suzume's production, it was the deadliest earthquake to hit Japan since 3/11. But the resort as we see it is not collapsed. It is merely abandoned. And since we understand it as a resort, a luxury space, we assume its abandonment to be economic in nature. It simply went bust, depriving people of these happy memories. The memories that should be there. O wise and unseen gods hidden among us, O guardian deities of our distant ancestors, these mountains and rivers you long ago bestowed upon us, most humbly and most sincerely, we return them unto you. It seems quaint, it's only a resort. Maybe it doesn't deserve these hallowed words, but those pure and happy emotions deserved a sending off. It doesn't matter that this place was not the victim of an earthquake or tsunami, but just the victim of time and circumstance. It was made by humans, but its fate was never entirely in our control. For the children and the families who used to go there, we must return that control to the powers that be, and honor its memory. When Suzume and Sota go to Ehime, we hear that the old school was abandoned because of a landslide. This is a more overt reference to landslides which occurred in Ehime due to heavy rains in 2018, but it is not the landslide that the movie focuses on. The emotions on display are the innocuous chatter of school students. We encounter one of those students in the ever-cheerful Chika. Chika doesn't display outwardly her desire to go back to her old school, but who among us really does? Like Suzume, she probably hides those emotions, maybe even from herself, but she repays Suzume's closing of that door with a warm and nurturing place to stay. Perhaps those emotions were released through her reconciliation with the place which nurtured her childhood. The abandoned theme park at Kobe is interesting, because while it's explicitly located at the namesake of the Kobe earthquake we earlier discussed, the film makes explicit that the theme park's shutdown is not related to the quake. It was purely economic. And in this case, the happy emotions of the onlookers just at seeing the park light up at night are tangible. Childhood, enjoyment, budding romance, these are the auspices of the theme park, forever gone from the town which needed them. They have a door in need of closing. In Suzume's narrative, the doors are connections to the ever after, the literal realm of death. To leave them open is to invite calamity. In Suzume's metaphor, these doors are the trauma of loss of place, loss of memory. And to forget them, to ignore them, is to invite the door to trauma to reopen. All throughout our journey, we are taken to doors in places which clearly allude to real natural disasters. But the places in the film were not taken from us by disaster. It doesn't matter. They are still deprived of the happy emotions that should be there. They still deserve remembrance. The truth is, in spite of itself, Suzume is not a film about Fukushima. Suzume is a film about remembrance. I still remember the comic store where I discovered Makoto Shinkai some 20 years ago. It was not a profound place, a stuffy, dimly lit local business sandwiched between a restaurant and a dry cleaner. I would walk there with my father, and being not even 13 at the time, the eclectic clerks would tease me for not being able to rent the mature videos on my own. But it was the treasure trove of rentable tapes and DVDs that changed my life forever. In those long night walks with my father, discussing the things we rented, what we liked and disliked, I began to critique the movies I watched. It was one of the clerks who treated me with respect that made me realize I could take this part of culture as my own, and connect with others who took it for theirs. And it was there I first picked up the innocuous DVD copy of Voices of a Distant Star, a very rare commodity nowadays, and solely on the basis of its cover art, I started the journey which would lead me here. Around 2007, the store stopped renting anime. Perhaps their mainstream comic business was more viable, and with the rise of Netflix, perhaps they saw the writing on the wall. But one way or another, the space was no longer for me, and I stopped going. They moved eventually to a spot nearby, changed their name, and focused entirely on Western comic books and trading cards. I haven't gone in over a decade, and I doubt any of the old regulars are still there. The former comic shop became a lowly milk tea cafe that I've never entered. But every once in a while, if I'm in the area, I see the same telltale colonnade outside the front windows, and I remember the place that I lost. All of us who are old enough have lost places. The loss of those places is important to acknowledge, to remember, and they are all too easily lost. When we arrive in Tokyo in Suzume, we are technically not shown a disaster, but we can feel what it would be like to see it happen. To see the daily lives of millions taken is something we can barely comprehend. The film stops short of destroying Tokyo, but it didn't have to, because it had happened before. As alluded to in the film, Tokyo had its own reckoning almost exactly 100 years ago. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, famously depicted in Miyazaki's The Wind Rises, was the most deadly earthquake in recorded Japanese history. Over 100,000 people were killed, and all we see of that time in the film is a single decrepit gate under the streets of Tokyo. They no longer feel connected to it, and who can blame them It's not Tokyo's fault that the Tokyo of 1923, lost to history, is also lost to memory. It was lost in the earthquake, lost in the firebombings of World War II, and slowly lost block by block as the city and its spaces were rebuilt in the post-war. Tokyo now has almost nothing to remember of the small places, the day-to-day stores, the little things of the past. We all sympathize with the loss of childhood, the loss of happiness, and the inability of anyone to fully maintain the things which make a place special. And that means we are all connected to everyone else experiencing this phenomenon. There is meaning in conveying our memories, happy and painful, because others can sympathize with our feelings. We have the capacity as empathetic beings to hold remembrance for things that didn't happen to us directly, just as Sota ultimately does when he helps Suzume to seal her final door. When Suzume unearths her diary, the literal embodiment of her memories, we also see that she has literally scribbled them out. So determined was she to forget this most painful moment of her life. This is the only instance in the film where we hear the sounds of the disaster. So raw and so visceral is her emotion. But remember, these are not the emotions which should exist in Fukushima. They are the feelings that Suzume has literally buried for years since leaving. Only when she and Sota finally close her door do we see the emotions which should exist in Fukushima. At the start of Underground, Murakami invites us, the readers, on a hypothetical exercise, which I would like to repurpose for us as we contemplate the finale of Suzume. I'll be changing some of the details for relevance, but if you'll indulge me, I'd like you to imagine. The date is Friday, March 11th, 2011. It's a beautiful, clear spring day. There's still a brisk breeze and people are bundled up in their coats. You're probably thinking, I wish I didn't have to go to work today. No such luck. You got up at the normal time, you washed, dressed, breakfast, and headed for the subway. You board the train, crowded as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary. Promises to be a perfectly run-of-the-mill day until... These memories are not particularly joyous. They're not sad in of themselves. They're just normal. The innocuous moments of people leaving home. Saying the kind of goodbyes that we don't expect to be final. Normalcy should be in Fukushima. Suzume should be in Fukushima. Suzume should be an unremarkable girl. But it could not be. O wise and unseen gods hidden among us, O guardian deities of our distant ancestors, these mountains and rivers you long ago bestowed upon us, most humbly and most sincerely, we return them unto you. January 1st of 2024, another earthquake struck Japan's northern Noto Peninsula. Over 200 people have died, and over 10,000 were displaced, including many from a small town called Suzu. The world of 2024 is filled with traumatic events, creating doors which will remain open for decades if they are left unacknowledged and unremembered. If your life now doesn't have a 311, there's a fair chance it may one day. But even if you're among the fortunate who won't experience great disaster, you'll experience loss of place in your lifetime, and you'll be connected to all of us who do. I was not in Fukushima, but neither was Tamaki. She's still amongst the affected. Everyone should have a comic store that rents anime. Everyone should have a resort you went to with your grandparents. Everyone should have a school that's safe and nurturing, a theme park that's fun and nostalgic, a city that's stable and prosperous, a home that you grew up in, that will be there if you want to return, a childhood free from the pain of death. But if we lose those things, we must remember them if we are to move forward. All of us who remember are connected to the places that we lost, and to people around the world who are remembering. Remembrance is a collaborative, expansive act. It extends from immediate victims to their immediate families, to their country, to all humans across the world. Suzume isn't just a film that can be appreciated by the world. It gains its meaning by the fact that the world appreciates it. Our resonance with Suzume shows that remembrance is a worldwide phenomenon. This is the message of Suzume. As the 2024 awards season wraps up, the films of 2023 will slowly fade from our memories. We only have enough time to see so many films, and enough space in our hearts to hold so many films dear. But whatever films you take with you, I hope you'll take the time to remember the things and the places that you've lost along the way. I hope your precious memories, for good and for ill, will leave you ready to move forward. I hope you will consider expanding your remembrance to people and places near and far. And I hope that perhaps you'll find the time to remember Suzume. As I asked friends about their experience, Mifune has a misunderstanding occurred. Meow? Yes, you. Meow. Meow?